good morning to you, Michael, and very happy to have you, for the first time. But I'm sure this won't be the first or the last time ever. Uh, Michael, one question that I have for you to start with, because I know your expertise on South Asia and your views, which are at times not much appreciated in India. There are multiple people who won't like to agree with you, but still your views are important. That's what I feel, and we have been talking about these things together for a very long time now. So, starting with Bangladesh, Michael, how do you look at the story that it appears right now? It started. I know you started writing about it very seriously when the elections were about to take place, and you had your views. But how do you see it has come that this time span? How the story has developed?
Yeah, well,
How
first
do
of
you look
all,
at it?
it's great to be here with you, first of all, and really looking forward to this conversation. And I'm ready for the comments to be quite fiery when this is posted. At any rate, yeah, in terms of Bangladesh, it's to me it's a very precarious situation. I think that we're at the point now. It's been more than 2 months since the the main issues played out, so to speak. It's been several months since Sheikh Hasina left the country, and I think that for the first week or two or three, there was a significant level of euphoria in Bangladesh, quite frankly,
Yeah.
because Sheikh Hasina had really fallen out of favor with so much of the population. A lot of hope and optimism, which is not unusual when you have these mass movements. But I think that if you look at how things are playing out now, the honeymoon is clearly over for the interim government. It's got major challenges on its hands. And I think that for me, I mean, several things stand out. One, I've long observed the extent of what one could describe as retributive politics playing out in Bangladesh. You have this incredibly polarized political environment that essentially means that whatever party or entity is in power is going to go after the opponents hard. And that happened during the Sheikh Hasina era. She went hard after the opposition. And now what we are seeing with this interim government, which theoretically, officially, does not have any political parties represented in it. Right? The advisors, Dr. Yunus, none of them are currently members of political parties. We're seeing, we just recently saw the Awami League being banned from political participation. We've seen a number of arrests of Awami League supporters and leaders that are taking place under what I would describe as very spurious charges. Um, and of course, though we're not seeing as much of this now, we had seen significant levels of retributive violence against those perceived to be supporters of Sheikh Hasina and her party. This is what really worries me, quite frankly. This is an interim government that has huge challenges on its hands and operates under a lot of pressure. And basically, what I mean by that is that it's set very ambitious goals, which has generated very high expectations from the public. This is an interim government that said that it's going to rebuild the country, it's going to engage in large-scale reforms, and then it's going to make politics less corrupt. And yet, as you well know, this is not an elected government, and it has not said specifically when elections are going to take place. So what I worry about, and I'll end here, is if the public continues to believe that the economy is not being stabilized, which has been sputtering for quite some time, if the reforms process appears to be stalling after, say, 6 months or so, and there's no clear indication of when the elections are going to take place, then I think the public could grow quite impatient, and that's when you have to worry about the risk of a new phase of protest and perhaps a new phase of political violence as well.
What really worries me also is the student protests that are taking place right now, asking for the resignation of the president. One, another, probably you could also throw some light because it's not being talked about much. Is I think the army chief of Bangladesh is right now in US, and so I wonder what could be the agenda of him because Dr. Yunus was in US just some time back. So what could be the agenda of him? And probably one thing that most people talk about here, and I don't hear much about it from US side, is what Sheikh Hasina actually alleged US of is the story of St. Martin Islands, and you remember what the whole thing is. What exactly is the conversation about it in US? I mean, how do they react to it about this whole story of St. Martin and that somebody met her and were asking for it?
Yeah, so to your question about the Bangladesh Army chief, indeed, I don't think I know much more than you would. I have heard that he's been in Washington. Today we're talking on Friday. My understanding is that he was here earlier this week, but I don't know much about that. I mean, we've seen a very large number of senior Bangladeshi officials coming to Washington in recent weeks. Going back to when Yunus was in New York for the UN General Assembly meeting, and then you had the foreign secretary of Bangladesh spend a few days in DC with a number of senior officials at the State Department. But yeah, this is the first case of having a military official here during these last few weeks of engagements. Look, as you well know, the U.S. government is feels very comfortable with this engaging with this new government in Bangladesh, but it also, I think, is keen to engage with other key power brokers. And I think that this is the military in Bangladesh is not the Bangladeshi military of decades ago. It's one that prefers to stay out of the political limelight, that prefers not to be involved. But given the sudden severe political vacuum that set in Bangladesh after Sheikh Hasina left, I think it's really impossible for the army chief to avoid being involved in politics. And the fact that the army chief publicly suggested a time frame for elections, the only official to do that publicly at this point, that says something. At any
Yeah.
rate, yeah, I don't know why he would have been here, but there has been a fair amount of discussions in recent years between the U.S. and Bangladesh on maritime cooperation, things like that, cooperation in the context of the Indo-Pacific. I'm not sure if that's what would have been discussed on this trip, but it is notable that he was here for sure. So to your question about Sheikh Hasina's allegations about the U.S. and St. Martin, the interesting thing on this, I did some reading, trying to get a sense of myself as to why we would hear this allegation. I'm sure you know this because you know so much about these things. This is actually an allegation that goes back many years, and going back, quite frankly, to times when the Awami League was not in power, right? And there was a speech that a former or a Bangladeshi ambassador, pardon me, a U.S. ambassador to Bangladesh gave many, many years ago. I think it was sometime around 2005, 2006, something like that. I'm blanking on her name, not Marsha Bernacut. It was several before. Anyway, she said she said now. I do want to set to rest this canard that keeps coming up in the Bangladeshi press, and that is that the U.S. is trying to achieve sovereignty over St. Martin's Island. It's not true. It's completely false. This was like several decades ago. So clearly there's something to this, and I don't know why. My understanding is that there's absolutely no reason why the U.S. would want to gain access to this island for both strategic reasons and for logistical reasons as well. I think that we have to look at this allegation that Sheikh Hasina reportedly made in the broader context of her grievances against the U.S. and U.S. policy, which I think one could understand, right? Going back to, you know, U.S. support for the Pakistani army in '71, and also U.S. support for Yunus more recently. Her view is that the U.S. has tended to side with some of her most bitter rivals, and that this is a view. And so when she stood before Parliament some months ago and said that indirectly that the U.S. was behind a regime change, I think it was tapping into those longstanding grievances. And I would think that this St. Martin's allegation, which again has been made by other Bangladeshi leaders, not just her and not just the Wami League figures, it's it's something that's just out there, and in my view, has to keep being rejected because I don't think there's any truth to it.
But in that case, hasn't Dr. Yunus actually received some kind of extraordinary support, if I may say so, ever since 2008 elections, if you recall, and he's been getting actually funding from U.S. side while Miss Clinton was there in power. I mean, Secretary of State. If you see how his association with Clinton Foundation ever since then, and the kind of funding, I think 30 million or something of sort amount of money that has gone from US to his organization, his NGO that he was running. And then his ambitions ever since 2008 that he should be heading the government, and his political ambitions were very clear since 2008. So is it not little, some, I'm not saying, I'm not putting allegations, but what I'm saying is there no connection between why the Clintons were actually, taking him on board ever since 2008 and investing money on him? What could be the reason behind that?
Yeah, I mean, right, absolutely. I mean, he's very close to a number of key members of the political elite, foreign policy elite in the U.S., and indeed, he has this close relationship with the Clintons. And indeed, when he was in New York for the UNGA meetings, the Clinton Foundation hosted a session or hosted
Mhm.
an event with him. I'm sure you
Yeah.
saw that. So yeah, there's no
Mhm.
denying that. But my sense is that the support that he gets from folks like the Clintons, not necessarily because of his politics, but it's more so because of the work he's done that got him the Nobel laureate. His work, in support of microfinance and being such a big pioneer in that field. I think it comes down to that, quite frankly. Now, I will say that certainly in more recent years, as he became a sharp critic of Sheikh Hasina, I think that certainly was seen with favor, so to speak, or it was a message, it was criticism that resonated among those in the U.S. that were concerned about Sheikh Hasina's policies and what's been a pretty strong belief here for quite some time that she was taking the country back towards authoritarianism. So I think that yes, I mean he'd get some support for that. But my understanding is that his relationship with the Clintons and the Clinton Foundation and others like that, a lot of that was tied to non-political.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, I can understand why people would be, concerned that this guy, all of a sudden he's leading the interim government after becoming a sharp critic of Sheikh Hasina and being close to the U.S. But if you connect the dots, honestly, I think that the best one could conclude from that is that there's a lot of strong, good feelings between him and many on the U.S. side because of his work as a on the econ side, and I guess that was leveraged in the sense that he has a good relationship with the United States. And in that sense, it makes Washington very comfortable working with him and wanting to work with him now that he's, at least for now, heading the country.
Something very strange you just mentioned about the Bangladeshi army chief, and he said that Bangladeshi army has changed over last years, and that they don't want to do anything to do with politics of the country. And it suddenly reminded me that the current army chief in Pakistan also, it's kind of draws a similarity, that he also, when he came in, had this policy of not getting into the politics of the country, and suddenly he has to play the leading role. So then kind of there was some common connection that appeared between the two countries. And so it just on a lighter note, but then I thought, if you see that connection at all.
Well, I don't know if we could compare a Bangladeshi army chief to a Pakistani army chief for reasons that you and your audience would well know. I mean, I think any time a Pakistani army chief gives their final speech before they step down, the trend in recent times is for them to say, well, this time, the army really needs to stay out of politics, and it never happens. General Bajwa said that on his way out, and then General Munir is here, and he, I think, has been more active in Pakistani politics than any previous
Yeah,
army chief going back to when there was formal army rule. Um,
correct.
but I think that with the Bangladesh chief, let's keep in mind, I think that, quite frankly, I mean, someone in India would disagree with me, but that's okay. I think that the army chief and the Bangladesh army was really never was really with Sheikh Hasina until the bitter end, right? I mean, there was no coup, there was no military coup in
Yeah.
Bangladesh. It was only the night before she fled the country when the army chief basically said to her, we're not willing to enforce this clampdown, this curfew. And basically
Mhm.
that's when it was saying that it was withdrawing its support for her. But that happened the day before she left. It was very uncomfortable with the crackdown that she was ordering the law enforcement lay out against the protesters. But the army, I think, to the last night before she left, wanted to sort of stay out. The army didn't want to be present on the streets. It didn't want to be working with the paramilitaries and the police in this vicious crackdown, but wanted to stay back. And I think that reflects how the army in Bangladesh has changed from, really, going back to the early years of Bangladesh's existence, ever since, 2006, 2007, 2008, ever since 2009. I think we've seen a
Mhm.
different Bangladeshi army.
I tend to agree with you, because also I think they have some kind of a relation as well. The army chief is somehow related to the former
Right.
prime minister. But so that is understandable, and I can see what you're saying is that he did support in a way her, the way she fled out. Well, she could have very well held out, she could be held back. So okay, so let's move to the next, and that is the Brics Summit. And I just read your BBC article that you wrote, and it's a wonderful piece. And you actually spoke about some things that not many people are talking about. So what problems do you see in terms of that the BRICS faces after this summit? You spoke about the differences between certain countries. Iran doesn't see some countries face to face, and some others. What kind of differences do you see within BRICS?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to that, let me just make one clarification. I couldn't remember the name of the U.S. ambassador that many years ago had said that the U.S. wasn't trying to gain access to St. Martin's Island. It was Mary Ann Peters, and she was U.S.
Mhm.
ambassador to Bangladesh in 2003. So you see how
Ah,
far this goes back. And this was when the Awami League was not in power.
yeah.
Anyway,
Mm,
so to your
mm,
question about BRICS, thank you. Thanks for the kind words about the article. One of the many things I appreciate about you is that you tell me when you disagree, but you also tell me when you do when you appreciate something. So it's very
mm,
kind. So yeah, BRICS is going through a very interesting moment right now, right? I mean, for so long, I think many people here thought it was a sideshow, that it was essentially an opportunity for some countries to get together and talk about things they'd like to do but would never do because they wouldn't want
mhm,
to. And there wasn't much buzz around it. But as we've seen things play out in this world over the last year or two, particularly since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, especially since the war in Gaza began and Middle East instability became more intense, and as the U.S. Support for Israel has remained strong, and as the global South experiences significant levels of economic stress and feels indebted and feels that it's not getting the relief that it would like to get from Western-led entities and structures, you're seeing more interest in BRICS. And I think it's remarkable that Putin, who the West would like to isolate, he managed to bring, I believe, 36 countries
yeah.
to Kazan, to Russia, for this BRICS summit. Not only that, the UN Secretary General went, which I think was
Mhm,
pretty significant. You have
yeah.
4 new members. There's going to be a few more. Saudi Arabia has been offered membership. It hasn't formally joined yet, but will soon. Turkey could be joining. That would be pretty interesting as a NATO
Yeah.
member. So
Mhm,
there's a lot of buzz around BRICS, and I think it's impossible for even the sharpest critic of BRICS to say that this group doesn't mean anything. It does. So
mhm,
I think for India, and this is what the article gets into, there's a
mhm,
lot of advantages, which might seem counterintuitive because BRICS has always projected itself as an alternative to the West. You have new members coming in, including Iran, that are avowedly anti-West. Belarus may be joining, Cuba may be joining, and so here is India, which wants to balance its relations with the West and countries outside the West without appearing to be hostile to the other side, so to speak.
mhm,
So I think
mhm,
the risk for India might appear to be that if BRICS keeps becoming more prominent and robust, that it could become a substantive force that could actually counter the West with a new bank, with a new payment system that evades Western sanctions and all of that. But I argue in the piece that may not be the case, and that benefits India. I think that this expanding BRICS is good for India because it's bringing on a number of new countries that are very close to India: UAE, Egypt, Ethiopia, um,
mhm,
and there's that. And BRICS, as we saw through the joint statement released at the summit in Russia, it's articulating the very principles that India itself most prioritizes in its foreign policy, right? Embracing multipolarity, trying to engage with and advocate for the global South, calling for the reform of international institutions, including the UN. These are major Indian foreign policy goals. I think that's important and great. But here, on the issue of what BRICS could become, I would argue, and here I sort of acknowledge that a lot of the longstanding criticism of BRICS is still in place. I
mhm,
think that you have a lot of countries within BRICS that don't get along with each other, even if India gets along with most of them. I think it makes
mhm,
it difficult for the group to achieve the type of cohesion and consensus that would be needed in order to make this group come out with specific projects and initiatives that would actually pose a threat to the West. So I don't think that you're going to see a formal new international payment system. I don't think you're going to see things like that. Not to mention, some of the BRICS countries, including India, would likely be uncomfortable about any type of entity meant to reduce reliance on the dollar, given how important the dollar is to the Indian economy, the Brazilian economy, the South African economy, even the Chinese economy. So
Mhm.
at the end of the day, what I argue in the piece is that India's in a good place with BRICS. It serves India's interest, but I think that at the same time, it's something that its own continued constraints benefit India as well, because that means it will not turn into this bona fide threat to the West and that type of thing. And India would not want to be part of something that would be perceived in that way.
I totally agree with you when you talk about India on the, whatever you said about India and Indian policy, because I also believe that I don't think India is going to be part of any kind of conflict or conflicting issues with the West, because we have our own interest with the West. We have so much to gain and work with US, for example. But one thing that uh, how do you look at Russia in this case? I mean, how would the West be looking at Russia and in connection with the BRICS and what has taken place now?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the West is very concerned about Russia and everything it's doing now, and it doesn't want any of its allies and partners working with Russia. And of course, India is doing just that because it's a close friend of Russia's. I think that in Washington and other Western capitals, I think that there still is this unwillingness to recognize how significant a player BRICS is becoming. And BRICS has always been led by Russia and China, even as it continues to expand. I think that Russia has really been one of the major drivers behind it. As with SCO, I see those as being driven mainly by Russia and China as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, this is very concerning for the U.S. I think that the U.S. also would hopefully recognize that its efforts to isolate Russia have failed. I mean, you see the type of turnout that Putin got for the Brics Summit. It was remarkable in terms of all the countries that were there. So including some Western partners like Turkey. So I think that this will continue to be a challenge for the U.S. When it comes to Russia and its place in the U.S.-India relationship, that's a bit different. I think that there, speaking at least for the current administration, we of course have an election in a few weeks, things could change, but the current administration has accepted that India is going to continue to work with Russia, and there's really nothing the U.S. can do about it. Nothing that it would want to do that could risk imperiling its relationship with India. It wouldn't want to do that. And the administration is playing a long game. It's essentially acknowledging that India is going to continue to engage commercially with Russia. It's going to continue to import Russian oil and Russian weapons. But the U.S. hope is that in due course, the U.S. could make a pitch to India that the U.S. and some of its allies and partners, France, Israel, some others, could be in a position to begin supplying India with the type of military equipment that it's long depended on from Russia. And I think that there's a hope that in due course, the U.S. can also be in a position to be a better, greater energy partner with India. We talk so much about energy cooperation between the U.S. and India these days, but a lot of that revolves around clean energy. But if you go back just 3 years, India was actually um, the top destination for U.S. oil exports, which is very interesting. And so, India has, as you know, India's government has said very frequently that we're importing Russian oil because it's cheap oil, and we need cheap oil, and we would welcome other offers of cheap oil. So if the U.S. could work out an arrangement sometime down the road where it could provide oil at the price point that Russia could, that could be helpful. I don't know if that would necessarily happen, quite frankly, just because of the dynamics of
Never heard.
economics.
Mm.
Yeah, but that's basically the position that the current administration has wanted to take. It's going to accept what India is doing. It doesn't like it. It doesn't agree with it, but it's going to accept it and hope that things could change further down the road.
But Michael, in that case, something that actually I personally, as well as many in India, find a little uncomfortable with while dealing with the whatever the relationship we have with US is, for example, the current the Predator deal that we just concluded. We just had this some 31 Predators coming from US now. The deal is done for some 4-5 billion. Uh, this deal was also actually initiated in 2018, and it has now concluded in 2024 now. uh, why does it take so much of time to actually deal with the US when it comes to these kind of commitments? Because you see, in the meantime, the technology changes, the equipment changes, the stuff changes, and for example, the kind of problems we are facing right now with GE, with the engine issues for the aircrafts. Uh, um, doesn't you don't you think that it actually somehow makes one little hesitant, whether one can trust, because some of the commentators from US have been posing it as if these engine deals are being stopped by US just to put India under pressure. When you get that kind of impression, actually the whole relationship gets a little hesitant.
Yeah, no, I think we have to acknowledge that these are concerns for the relationship. I'm not privy to the details about why we're seeing delays in that particular deal that you mentioned, but I think that one problem here gets to the root of a constraint for U.S.-India relations, and that
Mhm.
is a tendency to set expectations that are too high. I mean, this is a relationship that's achieved so much over the last few decades and has really
Yes.
come, given how things were in the 90s, things are
Mhm.
looking really good these days. But I think that sometimes there's this tendency to think that, because he had, the civil nuclear deal, which was, when it first came out, it was this much ballyhooed thing. It was supposed to be this incredible indication of a new strategic partnership. We know that that deal didn't work out very well for the
Yeah.
two sides. And I think that there's, ever since that, officials on both sides, certainly in the US side, have used like such grand rhetoric to suggest that you have all these big new developments and accords and agreements, and everything's going to move forward very quickly. But these things do take a lot of time, especially when it comes to arms sales and when you're dealing with tech transferring technology. Export controls are always going to get in the way. So I think that if the relationship had set somewhat different expectations, I think there would be more patience when these things take a long time, quite frankly. Um, but yeah, I know this has been a concern on many occasions, and for me, one of the things that truly stands out, though I think a lot of people have forgotten about this now. um, when India was suffering through its terrible COVID wave several years ago, and there was a lot of concern in India as to why the Biden administration was not doing anything to even issue a statement expressing solidarity with what India was going through and pledging support and all of that. And that then,
Mhm.
I think, got a lot of your Indian compatriots thinking, well, is this really a partner we can trust? Russia responded right away with pledges of support and medical assistance and all that. Where is the US? Now, in reality, the Biden administration was very new. It had only been in office for a few weeks, and it was not in a position to mobilize quickly. It eventually did issue statements and it announced a very large package to bring support to India. But I think that things like that, and maybe a bit of a different type of context than the one that you laid out, but I think that it's a relationship that I think is encumbered by its high expectations sometimes. Just this view that things are going to happen fast, just because things have moved along so quickly. The relationship is strengthened so quickly. But these things take a long time, and given what's been going on the last year with the whole Khalistan thing and how that's become an issue in the U.S.-India relationship, I think that we can't rule out that issue perhaps playing a role in how the U.S. chooses to proceed with commitments it's made to India, whether you're talking about arms sales or sending senior officials to India to participate in engagements, including President Biden deciding not to go to India for the Brics Summit earlier the Quad
Big day.
this
Yeah.
year. You
Yeah.
can't rule out the fact that the U.S. is trying to sort of use those issues as leverage points to send a message about how unhappy it is about what it's accused India of doing with the attempted assassination. So, bottom line is that we do need to recognize that this relationship, as far as it's come, there's still a lot of issues to be worked out.
I agree with you, Michael. And we're coming towards the close the time that we actually spoke about. But then I'm glad that you raised this issue. It was not in my agenda, but then now that we've spoken about it, I seriously believe that probably the friends like you on the other side also have to understand, or put across the message is that there are also concerns in India when the Khalistanis are doing this theater in in US, for example, or any other country in Canada, for example, if they're insulting our flag, if they're attacking our high commissions or embassies, these things have to be stopped and taken care of. If our diplomats are not feeling safe, I mean, what relationship are we talking about then? If the people who are driving the relationship are sitting there and are being attacked, yeah, or for example, threats are being, Panan, for example, has been now issuing threats for our airliners. No action. I mean, you cannot glorify the terrorism in US. That's, I believe, it's even not in your law. I mean, it's not allowed even under your law that somebody threats another country. I mean, I don't think that's going to be acceptable. So if the country doesn't, if the government in US does not take any action on these kind of people, how do we move forward? I mean, it's not only issue on your side; it's one issue on our side as well.
Yeah, no, I completely, I mean, I agree with you. I acknowledge your position in a big way. And, I think back in graduate school, those of us that studied international relations, we took courses in interpersonal relations and cross-cultural communications. And one of the big, takeaways from that is that it's always important, and this is important in international diplomacy as well. You really have to think hard about what the other side thinks about a very sensitive issue. And indeed, the position here in the U.S. is that, well, this is an attempted extrajudicial killing. This is extremely serious. This is a U.S. citizen. This is someone that had not broken any U.S. laws. Sure, but absolutely, getting to your point, if you had people in India that were trying to advocate for a secessionist movement in the United States, and they were issuing threats against the U.S. government from India, you could be sure that the U.S. would be pressuring India in a big way to do
Absolutely.
something about that. Now, I'm not going to say that the U.S. would have resorted to an extrajudicial killing if India did not respond in ways that the U.S. would have wanted to in such a hypothetical situation. But I think it's important that we as in America need to sort of think about these things. If the roles were reversed, secessionist movements are very serious. I mean, that's a very serious threat. Even if one would argue, as I would, that the threat posed by a group of Khalistanis in Canada or the US or the UK or Australia or whatever, it doesn't appear to pose a clear present danger to India. But then again, getting back to the importance of we here in America thinking about how India would look at this, a lot of people in the West, I think, well, not Canada, they don't really have this excuse, but I think many in the West would not remember that you actually had a Khalistan movement. You had a violent insurgency. You had
Yes.
terrorist attacks. Again, you had the Air India attack in
Yes.
Canada. But I think that it's important for folks here to remember that this is something that at one point was a very traumatic issue for India, and it's understandable that India would be concerned that this could come back to become a threat again, even if that seems to be hard to believe from the perspective of many in the United States. So I think it's important to at least acknowledge that position.
There is one word that our foreign minister has now of late very often used, and that is mutual sensitivities. Now, these mutual sensitivities is something that we need to understand and see what the other countries are sensitive about, not only about yourself. I mean, if we had to speak about extrajudicial killings, then I mean, you know, Osama bin Laden was not coming to US to attack anything, but he was also killed, right, in another country. There was also a sovereignty of the country being breached. The same happened in Zawahiri case in Afghanistan. So if one had to look at lawfully, things, it's not that US has been has a clean slate in that case. So what I mean to say is that one has to understand the mutual sensitivities of each other and act accordingly, and that's how the international politics can move forward. And if we have to, moving forward from here on, whatever is happening in Brics, one has to understand that the world is not only US centered. It's now getting fragmented. It's no longer the same, the US and Russia or USSR anymore. So anyway, but then thank you so much, Michael, for your views today, because it's been very revealing to me. Some of the and many of the points that I got from your article that you wrote for BBC. I must say I must read it once again, because there are pointers that need to be pondered upon. So I'll in fact request my viewers also to go through it. I'll put the link in my behind this video. You should see that and read this article, because it raises questions that are not being talked about in general in newspapers. So Michael, thank you so much for being with me today, and I hope I'll see you very soon on another program.
Thank you. It was really great to have this conversation. It was an honor for me, and I hope to do it again sometime soon.
Yes, Michael. Thank you so much.